While this podcast will cover information about how to access therapy and other mental health services, it is not intended to be a substitute for said services. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you feel you are in need of mental health assistance, please seek out licensed professional care in your area.
Not that type of therapy podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to Mental Health Quest. I'm Charlene McPherson, LCSWC.
And I am Benjamin Tides, registered psychological associate and doctoral candidate, soon to be graduating this year.
We are very excited because we covered our diagnoses series, right? And now we're getting into our treatment series. And we're very, very excited to kind of go into more detail about specific treatments, what diagnosis they might be really useful for, and what they actually are. Because you hear a lot of things about, CBT, and, there's a lot of acronyms, to be honest. Actually going through the specifics of what those acronyms mean and what they look like, so that if you were seeking treatment, you might be able to go out and find that specific treatment which you think might fit best for you. And of course, because it's Benjamin and I as your host, we're going to start with geek therapy and superhero therapy, because that's just, there's no way we're not going to do that. And so please welcome our guests, Josue Cardona, MS, and Dr. Janina Scarlet. How are you all today?
So excited. Thank you so much for having us.
Good. Happy to be here. Yeah. Recovering from a cold, so sorry if I sound nasally.
I sound nasally no matter what anyway, so we're all good.
Well, so can we have Janina and Josue introduce yourselves a little bit about who you are and your specialties or your expertise or something to share with the audience?
So my name is Josue Cardona. I am the founder of the Geek Therapy model and the current president of the Geek Therapy nonprofit organization.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I am Dr. Janina Scarlet. I'm a clinical psychologist, author, and a full-time geek. And I am the founder of Superhero Therapy and a big fan of everything geeky.
Yay!
As are we. We're all so big fans of everything geeky. Hence why we're doing this episode. So,
first,
for our first episode of treatment series. I mean, we talked about this a long time ago for the audience members. Charlene and I were discussing this like months ago. We're like, okay, when we finally get to the treatment series, what do we want to do first? Like, CBT is the most common one. And I was like, no. Geek therapy, superhero therapy, that's our jam. So I guess that leads into the question is, what is superhero therapy and what is geek therapy? I guess we can start with Dr. Scarlet. Dr. Scarlet, what is superhero therapy?
Superhero therapy is a way of incorporating pop culture or anything that allows the client to feel connected to their superhero self, to help the client become their own version of a superhero in real life. It was initially designed to be trauma specific. So for clients who are struggling with trauma, it has now been developed for clients who are struggling with trauma, depression, anxiety, chronic illness, and a number of other disorders.
How did you get there? How did you go, hey, you know what? Because we've all had this moment, obviously all of us. What was that moment that was like, this is my jam, I love this, and it's therapeutic, so let me bring it into my practice?
There were 3 moments like it, actually. I think a lot of therapists out there, at the very least, a lot of trauma therapists. I am a trauma survivor. And as an immigrant, as a refugee, as a survivor, I felt very much alone in my experience. I was in middle school when my family and I immigrated to the United States, and I felt like, quote unquote, freak. I felt like an outcast. And for a very long time, I thought I was the only one going through the mental health challenges I was facing, primarily trauma symptoms and anxiety. And I didn't know what those were because no one in middle school talked about mental health. And then when I was 16, I saw the first X-Men movie, and it completely changed my life because it allowed me to see that everyone has something that happens to them, and that perhaps by forming communities where we share our traumatic experiences, we can find the superheroes inside us all. And so this movie made me rethink what happened to me and made me realize that we can use fiction to talk about mental health. So it's because of this movie, I went into the mental health field. I signed up for my first psychology class in high school. So that was the first moment. The second moment was when I was working at Camp Pendleton. I was working with active duty Marines who just returned home from the war and were going through severe trauma. And as I was attempting to incorporate the modality that I was supposed to be using, which was cognitive processing therapy, I saw that a number of Marines kept on bringing superheroes into the therapy room. And they would say things like, I wanted to be Superman, and I feel like I failed. Or they would say things like, you know how I felt when I saw my friend getting killed? I felt like how Bruce Wayne felt when he saw his parents getting killed. And it made sense to them and it made sense to me. And I started seeing the value of of incorporating pop culture into therapy to give clients a language to talk about their experiences. And so as I started doing it more and more, I saw the value of that. But I kept on thinking, well, this is probably silly, right? Nobody's going to think this is like valid. And then the third moment happened when I went to Comic-Con and saw Josue Cardona's panel on Geek therapy and totally fangirled and was thinking like, holy cow, this is actually legit and I can do this. And then develop the protocol from there, much with Josue's support and encouragement. And so those were kind of the three developing moments. And then it just took off from there. I was asked to train all of the providers on the military base. And then this is now a modality that's used internationally, including in Ukraine with the individuals going through trauma there.
I really find it amazing that the way that you kind of started it was by finding your own inner superhero first. I think that's definitely something with a lot of people who go into the mental health field. Like we go into this field because we're trying to understand ourselves, I feel, or something about our experiences, and then we want to be able to help other people through it. And so kind of your story reminded me of that. And then when you said that you were fangirling over Josue, I was like, wait, that's how I was fangirling over you when I first found out about Superman. And then through you, when I found out about Josue, I was like, there's even more to this? It's just a big cycle of fangirling.
So I have a question about that. You know, Janina. Janina's been on our podcast before. I will ask the hard hitting questions. Josue, I kind of want you to jump in here. The first time that you met Janina and saw the fangirling and was like, oh my gosh, this is really exciting to share this. Like, how was that for you, and how exciting was that for you?
It's always weird. I think it's funny actually. Janina wrote a blog post about that first event. So if you want to hear what was going through her mind, she jotted that down many years ago. Damn, Janina, that was like 13 years ago.
2013. It was July of 2013. 10
right,
years
yeah.
ago.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. The whole reason why we went there was to connect with other people. Something we've always done is want to talk to other clinicians, but also, the general public and tell them like, hey, bring this stuff in because if it matters to you, it should probably matter to your therapist and the people around you. It'll be helpful. It's beneficial if we do that. Everything that Janina talked to us about, that whole experience was just amazing because that's what I want. I wanted to meet people who were like, yes, honestly, selfishly, we were looking for our own people. But I was like, are there other people like that out there? And that's how, Geek Therapy started, also, I was like, oh, I'm all alone in this. And I started reaching out. I was like, I want to form a network. I cyber stalked a lot of people trying to find, my peers. And so it was so cool to go to this event and then meet people face to face and have them say like, no, this resonates so much with what I'm thinking, or your experience is so similar to mine. I want to do more of this. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty cool. It was overwhelming, I think, but it was great. Yeah. I think we had dinner, right? Like we went to dinner that night. Yeah. And we got to talk more. It was great. Yeah. Yeah. I think you forced me to have dinner. I don't remember if I had a choice or if you dragged me in. It was something like that. Right?
I dragged you by your ear and was like, you're going to dinner. Yeah.
I can totally see that happening. Okay. Because it's like when you meet someone where you look up to them like so much, to have that opportunity to sit down and talk with them. I mean, I probably would have done the same thing.
You would have also kidnapped me.
I mean, I would do it in a very kind way. I would do it like the here's some chocolate, follow the chocolate. Hopefully my bosses never hear me say this because I work with offenders, and so if my bosses think that I'm channeling my patients, they'd be like concerned. I promise I'm not. So I'm curious then also, Josue, about how you started the Geek Therapy. Did you have similar kind of moments where you were watching a movie and you're like, oh wow, yes, this, or how did it go for you?
I would add one more thing from before. I think it's awesome if you really respect someone's work or admire them, let them know, because sometimes doing the work is so hard, and getting that positive feedback it feels really good, but it's also very validating. So I appreciate Janina so much for doing that, because it was validating and encouraging, and I appreciate that so much. So Ben, to answer your question, I think I grew up in a household where my parents were pretty geeky, and that's something that united us. Like my earliest memory is playing Super Mario Brothers with my mom, playing different video games with my dad. We go to the arcade. They love sci-fi. Like we watched a lot of movies, and still that's the way we connect on a lot of things. And so to me, that was very natural. As I got older, it got harder and harder to find people who got the references. Like I saw the world through analogy and metaphor, and I don't think I had the words to say certain things. And like Janina's examples, it's like, oh no, like it's like this story, like that story. Or I would see something on TV, I'd be like, that's it. I don't have the words to explain it, but that's what it is. And so that was just very normal. Like that's just how I grew up. And it was hard to not have that when in supportive spaces, or in peer groups. So fast forward to I'm doing my internship as a mental health counselor, and I'm at this I'm working at a hospital with kids, and of course, like they love video games. They're always talking about video games. So I'm talking about different games with them, and they're like, "Oh, an adult that knows video games? What's this?" I'm like, "Who do you think makes video games, kid? What are you talking about?" And so it was a great way for them to connect. And then we had board games and things like that. And so I'm looking around. I had brought comic books in, but one day I'm looking for board games, and then like in this cupboard, I see that they have a Nintendo Wii. I get so excited. I bring it over to my supervisor. I'm like, "Hey, we have a Wii. Can I use it in some of the group work? I have some ideas." She said, "Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Video games, no. Like I don't remember how much like they rot the mind, but blah blah, or it's too. I don't know what she said." And I got upset, and then out of spite, I that night I went home and I made a website called Geek Therapy, just to prove her wrong and show her all of the positive things that I had seen that people were using in geek culture and technology and video games for. And I had a lot of like everything from like using VR for anesthesia to people using zombies to teach geography, and then a lot of mental health and psychology stuff. So I just started curating a whole bunch of content, and that's kind of where the name and the idea started. And then over time, meeting people like Janina, like you, it's like, oh, how do I do what you do? It was the question that kept coming up. And I trained in rational emotive behavioral therapy in New York. So like Albert Ellis is if I ever get a tattoo, it'll probably be of Albert Ellis's face. I'm a big fan.
I'm like fangirling over here over Albert Ellis, but whatever.
Oh, he's great. Yeah. And so I got to train at the Institute in New York.
That's awesome.
And one of the things that I always loved about it was how there were these formulas, and that worked for me. It was like A plus B equals C. I was like, okay, wait a minute. Maybe if I can come up with a way to kind of distill what I'm doing, what my friends are doing, and in a way, and then I saw that like some of us do things very differently. Like Janina has her own way of doing it. So as I kept distilling, I was like, okay, what's the core? And I came up with different ways to teach it and organize it. And so it got to a point where it's like, oh no, this is a thing. Like this is a legit model at this point, and it differentiates itself from other places. And like fast forward now 13 years since we started that first website, like we have these conferences now where we're celebrating all of geek and gaming culture being used therapeutically. And it's so great to have people like Janina and all of you guys presenting. Like Ben, you've presented like 4 times already at tags, which has been great. I think you did 2 last year and 2 this year, maybe, or 2 in the first one, 2 in the first. I'm not sure.
I did 2 last year. Last year was my first time. But I did submit. I already submitted something so far for this year, and you can expect at least 3 more submissions that include me. Because with multiple different people, like because the second you announced that panels, like the submissions were open, I like messaged everybody I knew. I was like, we need to do this thing. Charlene and I were talking about it. I was talking about it with my brother, and I was just like, go, 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 go.
For ethical reasons, I will state that I am not on the committee that approves those. So it doesn't matter what you say or do here; it will not influence my the decision of the committee.
Okay, as long as you enjoy it, that's all that matters.
But that kind of thing, like that's what I love. I love being able to, like we wanted to create that platform to have people share this information because there's so many different ways of doing it, and just like there are many different traditional modalities. Right? Like if you talk about CBT, but there's a whole bunch of different forms of CBT and second wave and third wave. And Janina and I we once had a thing where it was like RBT and ACT and ACT. I'm sorry. I just do that just to mess with people. I didn't want to do that live on here. And ACT, right? And like they're like, oh, this is how they're different, and this is how superhero therapy and geek therapy are different. Like having those conversations and creating a community where people do get excited, like, oh, I can submit a panel, let me go talk to other people. Like this would be great. And so I'm so happy where we are now as a community.
No, that's what I know. Benjamin likes the superhero therapy. I'm definitely the RPG nerd in the room. I run therapeutic role-playing games, social skills groups, but for adults, because kids get everything fun, and adults don't get anything fun. So I hear that. I love it. It's so much fun.
Yes, I wanted to ask, because I know Janina had mentioned that she started her super therapy initially for trauma work, and that it expanded into anxiety and depression. But I'm wondering, Josue, if I know from my personal experience that geek therapy is good for a lot of things, but like, is there an area of therapeutic work that you feel that the geek therapy model works best for?
I like to, the way I like to talk about it is that it's complementary, right? So I always say, what is your, have a solid theoretical framework, and then use this to help you with that, right? So depending on what you're doing, like if it's RABT, right, I'm looking for the looking at that activating event and what your beliefs are. So what can help me get there? And so that might be oh, maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a comic book, right? Something that resonated with you. Like the formula at GT is affinity plus resonance equals understanding. It's like, oh, there's something that I really speaks to me, I'm attracted to, I like it. It's like, oh, this somehow I'm connected to it. Usually it's positive. Oh, I'm attracted to this genre or this piece of work. And then the resonance, like, what did it make you feel? And that can be positive or negative, right? But then that's the opportunity. I'm like, oh, okay. It's hard to talk about a traumatic event. It's hard to talk about our own feelings. It's hard to see them. So what about if we talk about it from that other perspective? And as we're going through that, the therapist ideally is able to see what the client is not able to see. So I think, with anxiety, it works great. There's so many examples, but I think in general, like a trauma-informed basis of work is where it really shines, because it's so whether it's dissociation or just, different symptoms from trauma, that again, it's like, it's hard to understand. You don't even see what it is. And so I feel like subconsciously you can, right? Like, oh, that resonated with me. I don't know why I cried during that movie, but sometimes it's like, oh yeah, no, absolutely. My therapist helped me get there. And sometimes it's your friends who help you get there. Sometimes it's a parent or a teacher. That's why we try to teach these skills to, whoever wants them, like in community work. There's a lot of opportunity there. Especially like, when Janina talks about being an immigrant and coming, to a new country and feeling alone. I've worked with so many different populations. I speak Spanish, so I've worked with a lot of Spanish-speaking clients, undocumented, different levels of socioeconomic status, and in cities, in rural areas. It's so hard to connect like with everyone, right? It's so easy to feel like alone, but there are some stories that seem to just resonate with a lot of people, like these core ideas and these things that are kind of popular, and they help people connect with each other. And it's been great to be able to see people embrace that, because I think that there was a lot of resistance, I think, and I'm sure some people still experience that. Like my supervisor was like, "Oh, no video games, how dare you?" And now it's like, are you sure? Like, we all graduated now. We're all publishing research on this every day. So you can't tell me no about this particular thing. And so, yeah, I would say that piece of feeling alone, going back to Janina's example, I think that is super important, like, because you can see yourself in different types of media. And especially if you're part of a cultural minority, you don't always see yourself, or it's harder to see yourself in different types of media. And even though I encourage people to just resonate more with the experience or the feelings or the thinking than necessarily how it looks, that's not always easy to do. And so animation, video games, science fiction, fantasy, they give a different lens on there, and then you can kind of resonate with different parts, right? Where it's not just, oh, hey, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm, Japanese, I'm from here, I'm from there. No, it's like, oh, I really relate to the dwarfs in that particular story, or it's like, I'm such a Klingon sometimes, it's like, what does that even mean? It means something to you, and it means something very, very solid to you, and it's so I think it can be, I would say the best area is for people who are already geeks and are looking for just ways to understand each other. But I found trauma and anxiety are probably the best areas. That was such a long answer. I'm sorry.
I wanted to add a little bit to what Josue was saying, which was so on point. And I wanted to add to the point that Josue was making about dissociation. And so, for those listeners who don't know what dissociation is, it's something that actually happens to every single human on Earth. It's when we mentally or emotionally check out. And so, if, for example, you have a long drive home from work and you might not realize how you got home, but you did, that's an example of kind of minor dissociation, right? We get so caught up in our thought. But for many trauma survivors, dissociation is actually a survival mechanism, right? And so when people are too overwhelmed by the horror of what they're experiencing, their emotions and their kind of awareness of what's happening changes. And so as a result, for many trauma survivors who are triggered, for example, or who are asked by, for example, a therapist to talk about their trauma, it might be too overwhelming for them. And the reason why is because to help people survive when they're really, really overwhelmed, the emotional part of their brain, known as the limbic system, shuts down the prefrontal cortex. That's the logic thinking part of the brain. It's a survival mechanism. So if there's a car coming at us, we're going to see it, and then our motor cortex will activate and get us out of the way before the prefrontal cortex will even realize, oh, there was a car coming. And so with trauma survivors, a lot of times the emotional part of the brain will override the logic thinking, shutting down the left part, right? The communication part. What does it mean? It means that when people are asked to describe how they felt when the most horrific thing in their life happened, they can't. That communication part of their brain is offline. But the right side of the prefrontal cortex, that part that's responsible for creativity, is still online. So people can still draw, people can write, and people can talk about fiction. And so this is where geek therapy, superhero therapy are so important, because people who might otherwise not be able to talk about their experiences can talk about fiction, can talk about, let's say, a superhero example, and then can make the connection, which can make them feel safe enough to understand what was happening, and can then bring that left part of the prefrontal cortex online to allow them to put the puzzle pieces together to understand what's happening. It's a safer way for trauma survivors to understand what happened to them without going into an overwhelm response.
Yeah, and that's what with the RPG therapy that I do, we don't, people think that we're going to put you through the trauma again. Absolutely not. Absolutely 100%. No, 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 no. We will be working on, standing up for yourself maybe a little bit more, or communicating your feelings through your character a little bit more, connecting with your party, right? A little bit more, those type of things. Talking about coming from a specific theoretical background, REBT is one of my favorites because, again, like you said, it's like step 1, step 2, step 3. Like, it's very, very easy to apply. I always felt that it was very frustrating to try and teach that and then say, okay, now go out into the world that has real world consequences and try these things, which is absolutely horrifying and terrifying for a lot of people. Geek therapy, superhero therapy, I always put a role-playing game therapy underneath a geek therapy, that it gives people a chance to, like you said, think about their traumas, think about their past, think about their mental health symptoms, their social skills, those type of things. Think about it and work through it in a place that's safe. It doesn't have real world consequences. If you're talking about that you're Batman, in your head, there's no real world consequences there. If you go and talk to your boss about how you're Batman, that might have real world consequences, right? So, like, using this as a therapy tool, I love actually seeing how the individual therapy, the cognitive behavioral therapy, is then applied through my groups, and just being able to sit there and see it happen, and then coming back to individual therapy and being able to reality check and be like, hey, yeah, no, you think somebody was upset with you, but I didn't see that. Can you explain that to me? So it's actually applying it in front of the therapist so that you can say, oh, wait a minute, let's look at that. That was one of the major frustrations of teaching, cognitive behavioral therapy, because you're always, okay, now go try it. And that's stressful.
So as a clinician, one of my favorite things that the Albert Ellis Institute did that helped me really develop, like, you go to a workshop and then you're done, right? But they used to do this thing called Friday Night Live. And then every Friday night they would have some of their master trainers just have people come by, and you didn't even have to be a therapist. Anybody could come by, and they would basically practice RABT on a stage. And then they would ask for volunteers, and you would see different skills come up. I was like, oh, that is how, and that's just learning science. Like, you have to put in the reps, you have to practice something to be able to learn it. And from both sides. So that's why we create so much content through the nonprofit. Like, how do we show people how to do this over and over and over again? And how do we use the either the latest stuff that's coming out to do that? So we have an open source library called the GT library where people can just add, right, using a particular format. Like, this is the piece of media, this is what I'm thinking, this is how I used it. It's right, just keep doing that over and over again. Like for RBT, Albert Ellis wrote the Guide to Rational Living, which I think is a great book. It's also like 40 years old at this point, and it's like real life examples. And helpful, also kind of boring, depends on what you find entertaining. So to be able to do that, on a weekly basis, have people continuing to show just how you can do this, and with the newest stuff that's coming out, like, because I think it's such a right, like you're talking about tabletop RPGs, they're you're right, they're having a wonderful long moment right now, right, where they're very popular, people are getting into it, and people are curious about it, so they're way more willing. And it's great that, that's common language, you can suddenly use that, when a big movie comes out, an Avatar, an Avengers movie, right, it's like, a lot of people are talking about that, let's kind of dissect some of the ways you can use this and then go forth, right, because it's going to be relevant for the next couple of weeks. And only through like that type of model have we found, at least, that I think it's the most helpful. Like, even for me, like, that's what I would want, right? Like, I don't want to wait 3 years for, a book to be published or something, about how to use it. It's like, no, okay, cool. Are there videos? Are there podcasts? Are there things that I can use to learn that? And yeah, I think using an example like, which is a good one. Actually, Chelsea, like, what is one of your favorite examples to then teach some of the skills to someone? Like, do you have a story?
A story? Oh, no.
So it's hard to teach, right? And then you find that through RPG, it's easy. I was just curious if you had a.
Yeah, no. So the one example I usually use is like, if I have a client who's working on like advocating for themselves, they won't stand up for themselves very often or whatever. Say they go into the court of a king, and the king looks at the whole party and is like, I want to talk to you. And will only talk to that person who needs to learn how to talk for themselves. But then they're also representing their teammates, their party members, things like that. And it gives them a really good chance in a, inconsequential situation. That king's not real. You're not, the situation's not real. To stand up for themselves and verbalize what they need and verbalize, what the party needs. And it's amazing to watch how people can do this when in their everyday life, they can't even tell anyone no, and it's just amazing. I love it.
Yeah. And there's so many stories. Janina can mention like 30 right off the top of her head, I'm sure, right? Where you're like, oh, you're the chosen one, you're this hero, right? You're this like, oh, you didn't plan on this, but all of a sudden you're put on the spot. And almost every single video game is that way, right? It's like, sometimes you get to choose your character, but lots of games it's just like, this is the one, right? And that reluctant hero, the chosen moment, right? Those are stories that can resonate. And if you find the genre that they really like, or something that they either a story that is meaningful to them or very recent, that's a great jumping off point to then address something like that.
Something about what you were mentioning about, because it makes people comfortable because this is something that they know. As I'm sure you guys have all had clients that they come in and they're very uncomfortable with being in therapy. Like, they don't know what to expect. Maybe their parents brought them in, and they don't know what's going on. They don't know what's wrong with them. They just know that something is wrong, and their parents like, you need to go see a therapist. And that's really intimidating for a lot of people, children, adolescents, or adults, to just be like, okay, you got to go to see this person who's going to break down your mind and like figure out everything, right? And I remember last year, I was working at a clinic and had a client. He was, I mean, I guess you could say like very typical teenage boy, like pouting, doesn't want to talk, and like, this is just during the intake session. I'm like just trying to get basic information. I'm like, what's going on here? And he just would not give me answers about even like where, who he grows up with, who his support system is. So I was just like, okay, are there any like shows or movies that you're watching? What are you binging right now? And he was like, oh, well, I like Naruto and I like My Hero Academia. And, he listed a bunch of anime. And I was like, cool. I know at least 3 of those animes. Let's talk about those. Just tell me all about the anime. And I saw this shift in his body language because originally he was very pouty, closed off. And then the second I asked him to just tell me all about his favorite character in the anime, he started slowly opening up. Obviously, our audience can't see me acting this out, but I just thought that was really wonderful. And we didn't even get to the whole, okay, what metaphors are working for you here. It was just to be able to talk about something that he probably isn't normally asked to talk about. And it took him a long time to be able to actually get to the point where he can connect the character's experience with his own. And we did it by we would just watch the episodes in session together, and then I'm just like, tell me about it. What did I just watch? I would pretend like I knew nothing about the anime when actually I love it. And I was just like, yeah, what was that all about? Like, what did this guy just do, and why did he do that? And the client would just get really open and very engaged, and was pointing out all the things that his mom had told me he was struggling with, and it took a couple sessions for him to realize that I feel like I'm kind of like this guy. I was like, oh, why is that? Well, because I also get angry a lot, or I did get this way, and I was just like, cool, let's go there. And I just like that therapy does not have to be scary. People do get intimidated by it because we are professionals who have supposedly an understanding of the human mind, and some people seem to think we can read minds. I've not yet been able to do that. I don't know about you guys.
No.
But and I have to actually tell my clients that I can't read your mind. You need to tell me what you're thinking. But it is intimidating for a lot of people to go into therapy, whether they want to go or not. And I think just allowing them to talk about what they like, their interests, their favorite show, their favorite video game, their favorite whatever, makes it seem less intimidating. And at least in my experience, just makes them more likely to want to talk to you about the actual important stuff.
So that's something that I'm seeing all across all the geek therapists that I've met, superhero therapists, geek therapists, that type of thing, is accessibility. We're all very, very mission oriented to make therapy accessible, less intimidating, more relatable, so that people don't feel as scared to access it. Do you all find that as well? It seems like that's the main motivation for every geek therapist or superhero therapist that I meet.
I think that's a part of it. And I think had you asked me 4 or 5 years ago, that would have been my consistent answer. But through my own therapy, I had a realization I'd say it was about 2 years ago, where I realized I built this community and I started doing things in that particular way because I was trying to not just make therapy accessible. I wanted to help people feel seen, whether they want to be there or not. They know that someone's here to support them. This is me, right? My entire life, every time I was in that situation, there were parts of me that were rejected. I know that if you don't like My Hero Academia, or your favorite character is Bakugo and not Deku, right? It's like that's not a rejection of me, but it's hard to feel that way, right? Like it's hard to rationalize it that way. It feels like, oh, why are you dismissive of what I like, or why are you dismissive of? And when we're talking about geek culture, it's you don't just like it, right? This is part of your identity, so it feels like a rejection of your identity. And so depending on where I'm teaching, GT, I will always ask what are people into? Because if it's a group full of I did this in Georgia once. I was like, okay, then I just use Bible stories because there was a lot of church-going religious people in the group. I was like, cool. Sometimes it's a lot of gardening comes up. I was like, let's go. Let's talk about gardening. I got metaphors lined up. And it's just to teach, right? It's oh, it's the things, that's your perspective of the world. I don't want you right off the bat to come in to something as important and beneficial as therapy, as getting support, and then immediately right off the bat, I don't watch that. Ooh, I don't know. I don't like that. Right. Because it's also a skill. Those are some of the skills that I teach. It's okay, you don't watch anime. Don't tell me that you don't like anime. Right. One of the examples I always give is my favorite Star Wars movie is A Phantom Menace. Don't tell me when I meet you the first time in therapy that you think that movie sucks. That's not the moment to tell me. As my therapist, you should never tell me that. My teacher, my parents, like, no, don't keep that to yourself. Ask me why. Come with curiosity, but like, don't just reject me right off the bat. And so, like, what you did, Ben, like, that story is beautiful. I love every time I hear stories like that, because the way I see it is yeah, there's rapport building and there's comfort, but also it's like I mentioned before about the kids and video games. It's like, you're an adult who likes video games. I was like, yeah, what did, like, and they'll test you and all this stuff, and that builds that comfort, but just creating that space where, oh, I can talk about this. You're curious and I can teach you about it. We can watch it together, right? Like, I always encourage people, bring clips, watch episodes, have video games in your room. And like, we all have super geeky rooms right now, right? Like, I see in everybody's background, listeners can't see it, right? But we've got Ben, you've got it's more traditional books, but I can see what kind of some of those titles are, which are geeky, right? But like, so
I have Janina's books right here.
There we go. Yeah. So, but like, that kind of space, right? Like, I always try to have toys and things in my space, to make people feel more comfortable. And that, yeah, you want people, like, ideally, you can't do the work. That's very much a Carl Rogers thing, right? It's like Bridgerian setup of like, be person-centered, like, create that space for people to be able to, I come in it that way also. Like, we're always moving towards improvement. We're always moving towards healing, but the world makes that really hard sometimes, and we can't do it alone. And so to be able to just like, oh, I can be myself all of a sudden, that's I think the best we can do.
I always say too, like, my clients know that I'm not judging them because I'm at the end of the tabletop role-playing game, dungeon mastering a game, playing the goblin and making noises and using an accent. You're joining in their world with them as well. And so, like, there's no way that I'm going to judge you when I'm at the end of the table making funny noises, So it definitely kind of, like you said, builds that rapport and that connection.
Well, I wanted to say thank you both, Janina and Josue, for coming on and sharing your experiences and your passions with us. This is big for me because just like how Janina reached out to you, is that how I reached out to Janina. You guys were talking about how different clients you could use it with. And I was working in a psychiatric hospital at the time. I was reading Janina's blogs like religiously. There's a lot of talk there about, groups and, individual with trauma and anxiety. And I was like, but nothing there related to my clients. And so I sent her an email. I was like, can I use this with psychotic people? And she's like, absolutely. And then like, she emailed me back like a bunch of stuff like, here, try this. And then we talked on the phone and it was just amazing. Thank you both so much for creating these modalities that have inspired many other therapists, including myself and Charlene. And hopefully our listeners will feel just as inspired, whether they are students of mental health or if they are, hoping to be consumers. Now they can know how to find a therapist that relates to them and their geeky interests. Where can our listeners find you guys on the interwebs?
You can find me just about anywhere. If you search for Janina Scarlet, I think I'm on all social media platforms. And my website is superhero-therapy.com.
And you can learn more about Geek Therapy at geektherapy.org and at Geek Therapy on all the things. TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube, even Twitter. We used to post all our things on Tumblr until recently. Like, wherever you are, we'll be there too.
That's exciting. Definitely thank you all for coming on. That was a really fun conversation. And you said, like, when you actually get to meet other people who are just as passionate as you are, it's recharging. So I get to start off the week with the recharge of being like, yeah, Geek Therapy. Yes, let's go.
I want to say one thing before I go. I want to apologize. I think I called you Chelsea before, Chelsea. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm recovering from a cold. I just really wanted to put that on record. Don't edit this out, editor. Leave it in. Names matter to me.
All right. On that note, we are going to end the episode. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for the support from our listeners. And if you enjoy our content, please rate and review us on iTunes. so that others can find our amazing content. We're also here to answer questions about mental health, so please ask us any questions you might have. Or if you'd like to reach us individually, you can email us at mentalhealthquest1@gmail.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter and Facebook at MHQ P Podcast. And you can find me at nat20therapy. .com, email, Twitter, Facebook, all over the place. Just put at Nat20Therapy. And Benjamin, where can we find you?
As of right now, you can find me through this podcast. I do have another podcast that I am still trying to get off the ground called My Hero Therapy, which is all about My Hero Academia, in case the listeners did not realize that I love that so much. So that is also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Yay!